Hello everyone. Welcome to the weekly focus for the Indian economy. For this particular week, I shall be discussing the important economy related articles from various sources such as The Hindu, Indian Express, Business Line, Business Standard, and so on. For this particular week, I have chosen 5 important articles, 2 important terms in news, as well as 2 schemes in news. The first article is related to the K-shaped stress in the household debt. The next one is with respect to securities transaction tax. The next one is with respect to the market cap on UPI transactions. The next one is on business correspondent model. The next one is with respect to global minimum corporate tax. This is basically news because of the withdrawal of US from the global tax deal. And then the 2 important terms, that is capital output ratio, incremental capital output ratio, as well as the state advice prices on sugarcane. So let's start our analysis with the first article related to the household debt. See, recently, the Reserve Bank of India has published the Financial Stability Report. In this particular report, the RBI has highlighted the overall trends in the household debt in India. The RBI has highlighted that the household debt of India was somewhere around 36 percentage of GDP in the year 2021. And from 2021 to 2024, that is in last 3 years alone, the household debt has increased from 36 percentage to almost 43 percentage of India's GDP. See, think what would happen if the household debt increases. It would mean that point number one, household would have taken more amount of loans, and on those loans household would be paying more amount of interest. And imagine if households are paying more amount of interest on the loans, it would mean that households would have less amount of money to purchase goods and services, right? So what will happen to demand in the economy? Demand in the economy would reduce. Point number two, if households have taken more amount of loans, in that particular case, there is a probability that the households could default on the repayment of loans. And this could have an adverse impact on the financial position of the banks. Point number three, if households have taken more amount of loans, which has led to decline in the demand or the consumption expenditure, in that particular case, the private sector investment in the economy would reduce because decrease in demand would discourage the private sector investment. So recently, we got to know about the estimates of the private sector investment for the third quarter of the financial year. And according to these estimates, the private sector investment has actually got reduced. Obviously, there are multiple reasons for the decline in private sector investment. But according to a number of economists, one of the important reason for the decline in private sector investment is attributed to the decline in demand by the households. Apart from that, all of you must have heard about the sharp rebound of the Indian economy after the COVID-19 pandemic, which is famously called as V-shaped recovery. Just like V-shaped recovery of the Indian economy, it is being said that the households in India, they are showing a kind of K-shaped stress in the overall debt. Why is this article important? As you can see, in the previous year prelims, questions have been asked with respect to debt. For example, in prelims 2022, there was a question related to non-financial debt. Similarly, in the same year, there was a question related to government borrowings from the household. Apart from that, In mains 2021, there was a question as to, do you agree that the Indian economy has shown V-shaped recovery in the recent past, and give arguments in the support of your answer. So, based upon this, for your prelims and mains, you are required to understand what is household debt and financial savings, their meaning, significance, and trends, the reasons as to why the household debt has increased, what is this K-shaped stress in the household debt, and if the household debt has increased, if it is a cause of concern or not. So based upon these topics, we will have 3 prelims questions for practice and a mains practice question. The question here is, do you agree that the recent increase in household debt is a cause of concern for the Indian economy? Give arguments in support of your answer. So what we will do here is, first and foremost, we will try to identify the relationship between savings and GDP growth in a particular country. And then we'll look into these concepts. So let's start with the basics. So when we say household savings, right? Do not think of household savings just as savings in the form of cash. In case of India, whenever we say household savings is a very broad based concept where households can save money in the form of deposits with the banks. Apart from that, if households are making investment in shares, corporate bonds, government securities, small saving schemes, insurance, pension, and so on, even though it is considered as an investment, in case of India, we also consider this as a household savings. So imagine if household savings in these financial instruments increase. For example, if households are saving more amount of money in the deposit with the banks would have more amount of money to give out loans, right? And if banks have more amount of money to give out loans, rate of interest on the loans would obviously reduce. If households are making more amount of investment in shares and bonds, companies in India would have easier access to capital. If households are investing in government securities, if they are investing in small saving schemes, it becomes easier for the government to borrow money. So because of all of these reasons, the investment rate in the Indian economy would increase. And as the rate increases, GDP growth rate would also increase. It is expected that if the GDP, that is the production of goods and services, increase, then the income of the people would also increase. So imagine a particular situation where the income of the people has increased, right? Generally, as the income of the people increases, the standard of living also increases. People's demand for goods and services would also increase. For example, a particular person's income may have increased. This person was earlier traveling by train would now prefer to take a flight, right? So demand for goods and services would increase. But let's assume in this particular situation that if income has increased by 10%, the expenditure on goods and services has increased by almost 5 to 6%. So what I'm trying to say here is the increase in income level is more than the increase in the expenditure. In that particular case, if people are earning more as compared to what they are spending in that particular case, the savings will further increase. So this creates a kind of virtuous economic cycle. And this virtuous economic cycle will help Indian economy to sustain long-term GDP growth rate. In fact, The economic survey few years back had highlighted that we need to have this kind of virtuous economic cycle where increase in savings should translate to increase in investment, and increase in investment will lead to increase in GDP growth rate. Apart from this relationship between savings and GDP growth rate, there is another way to look at the relationship between savings and GDP growth rate, and that is called as paradox of thrift. Thrift, as the name suggests, is that people are saving more amount of money. Now, like I said, ideally, if savings increases, GDP growth rate also increases. But according to paradox of thrift, it says that if people are saving more amount of money, in that particular case, it might so happen that demand for goods and services reduce. And if demand for goods and services reduces, this will discourage private sector investment. And if the private sector investment reduces, what happens to GDP? GDP will also reduce. So according to paradox of thrift, it says that if people end up saving more amount of money, then this could actually hurt the GDP growth rate in a particular country. So that way, what is the nature of relationship between savings and GDP growth? It is being said, if people save less amount of money or if people save more amount of money, both are equally problematic. If people are saving less money, then investment will reduce. If people save more amount of money, even then the investment will reduce. So there should be a kind of moderate savings in an economy, neither high, neither too high, neither too low. Such a moderate rate of savings in a country will obviously lead to this kind of virtuous economic cycle. Now let's understand about the trends in the gross domestic savings in India. See, when we say gross domestic savings, right? The gross domestic savings is the savings by three entities. One is household savings, second one is private sector savings, and the third one is public sector savings. These three together comprises of the gross domestic savings in the Indian economy. And if you look at the trend in the gross domestic savings, as you can clearly observe, in 1950s, the gross domestic savings was somewhere around 10% of India's GDP. And since then, the gross domestic savings increased. So somewhere around 2011-12, that is in the last decade, the savings rate had increased to somewhere around 34 to 35%. But from 2011-12 to 22-23, the savings has got reduced from 34% to somewhere around 30% of India's GDP. And can you see the nature of relationship between savings and gross capital formation? That is the investment rate. As the savings increased, the gross capital formation also increased. And as the savings reduced, gross capital formation also reduced in India. And like I said, gross domestic savings comprises of household savings and savings by private sector and public sector. The total gross domestic saving is 30% of GDP, out of which household savings is 18% of GDP, and the remaining savings, that is 12%, is by private sector and public sector combined. So the majority of gross domestic savings is actually contributed by households. In fact, households account for 60 percentage of gross domestic savings in India. And can you see the gross household savings has actually got reduced to 6-year low now, which means whatever decline that you have witnessed in the gross domestic savings of India, this decline is mainly on account of decline in household savings and not because of decline in private and public sector savings. This household savings can once again be in the form of two components. One is net financial savings and the other one is physical savings. Physical savings is in the form of investment in gold, home and silver. Financial savings is the investment in different financial instruments like deposits, shares, bonds, government securities, small saving schemes, insurance, pension, and so on. And like I said, the household savings is 18%. Out of this 18%, you can clearly observe majority of the household savings are not in the form of financial savings. Rather, majority of the household savings are in the form of physical savings. Apart from that, the second point you have to remember is the word which I have used. I have not used the word financial savings. Rather, I have used the word net financial savings. Why are we calling it as net? The reason being, how is this calculated? Can you see the formula? It is calculated as financial assets minus financial liabilities. Financial assets is all these instruments. Financial liabilities is basically the household borrowings. So think of this scenario. If household borrowings increase, financial liabilities would increase. And if the financial liability increases, the net financial savings of the household would also reduce, right? So see, the net financial savings of the household has declined to 47-year low of just 5%. So the net financial savings has reduced. And one of the main reason as to why net financial savings has reduced is because the financial liabilities, that is the borrowings of the households, have increased. How much has it increased? As you can see here, in 2021, the household borrowings as a share of GDP was somewhere around 36%. And as per the latest RBI's financial stability report, this household debt has now increased to 43% of GDP in 2024. So household debt has increased. And if household debt has increased means financial liabilities has increased, and if financial liabilities has increased means the net financial savings would obviously reduce, right? Now let's try to understand what is this K-shaped stress in the household debt in India. Okay, see here, to understand the K-shaped stress in the household debt, let's look at composition of borrowings and the distribution of borrowers. Composition of borrowings means for what purpose do people generally take loans? According to RBI, the people generally takes loans for three purposes. Number one is for the purpose of consumption, which is in the nature of personal loans, credit cards, consumer durable loans, that is to buy different consumer durable items like TV, refrigerator, washing machine, mobiles, laptops, and so on. People also take loan for creation of assets, which is like housing loans, vehicle loans, and two-wheeler loans. People also take loans for productive purpose like agriculture loans, business loans, and educational loans. So people generally take loans for three purposes. Look at the distribution in terms of the borrowers. The borrowers can broadly be categorized into subprime borrowers and prime borrowers. What do you mean by subprime borrowers? Subprime borrowers means people who have low credit worthiness, which means they have low capacity to repay loans. So because they have low capacity to repay loans, the chances of default by such people is quite higher. Prime borrowers means these people have high credit worthiness. They have higher capacity to repay loans. If they have higher capacity to repay loans, the probability of default by these people is considerably lower, right? So let's first focus on the composition and try to identify for what purpose are people taking loans. As of September 2024, you can see the blue color line highlights loans taken for productive purpose, and the orange line denotes the loans taken for creation of assets. So as you can see that almost 60%, that is more than half of the loans generally are taken for creation of assets and for productive purposes. And the remaining loans are generally taken for purpose of consumption, right? Same way, look at this September 2024. The prime borrowers are somewhere around 66% of total borrowers. It means out of every 100 borrowers in India, you would say two-thirds borrowers are prime borrowers who have high credit worthiness. The remaining one-third borrowers could be near prime or subprime borrowers, right? So having understood for what purpose people are taking loans for and the composition risk of the borrowers, let's identify the K-shaped stress in the household debt. It is being said that most of the super prime borrowers having more credit worthiness, these people are taking loans either for creation of assets or for productive purposes. So these two categories of loans are generally taken by super prime borrowers. So most of the borrowers, that is two-thirds of the borrowers, are super prime borrowers, and these two-thirds of the super prime borrowers are taking almost more than 50% of the loans for creation of assets and productive purposes. So what are the subprime borrowers borrowing money for? The subprime borrowers are generally borrowing money for the purpose of consumption. So subprime borrowers are borrowing money for consumption. And can you see what has happened to the share of consumption loans? Consumption loans, as you can see, has steadily increased, right? Thus, this shows a K-shaped stress in the household debt, where people who have high credit worthiness, they are borrowing loans for the purpose of asset creation and for productive purposes. While on the other hand, people who are considered to be subprime borrowers, they are generally taking loans for the purpose of consumption, that is personal loans, credit cards, and consumer durables. Having understood what is this K-shaped stress in the household debt, let's understand if this increase in household debt is it a cause of concern. Let's understand, number one, why is it cause of concern? So think of it. If the household debt increases, what will happen to net financial savings of the household? Net financial savings is financial assets minus financial liabilities. If household debt increases, financial liabilities would increase. So net financial savings of the household would reduce. And we know that the net financial savings of the household has reduced to 47-year low of just 5%. Second, if households have taken more loans, then there will be more interest burden on the households because they have to pay more interest on the loans. Households will have less money to purchase goods and services. So if they have less money to purchase goods and services, there would be decrease in the consumption expenditure, that is the demand. And if the consumption expenditure reduces, it will discourage the private sector investment. And the same thing has happened in the third quarter of the financial year. Apart from that, you must understand the consumption loans like personal loans, credit cards, right? And consumer durable loans, they are generally unsecured, which means they are not backed by collateral. And if they are not backed by collateral, obviously it increases a greater risk on the banking sector. So if the households who have taken these consumption loans, subprime borrowers, if they default on repayment of loans, it would have an adverse effect on the balance sheet of the banks. In fact, the same situation had happened somewhere in 2014-15, and that situation we call it as twin balance sheet problem, wherein on one hand balance sheet of the banks had come to be dominated by more NPAs, while the balance sheet of the companies had come to be dominated by more amount of debt. So companies had borrowed heavily, and these companies were unable to repay loans. So the balance sheet of the banks also got affected. So India could see a repeat of the twin balance sheet problem now, except the fact that earlier, when we said twin balance sheet, it refers to balance sheet of the banks and balance sheet of the companies. But now it could be household debt and the balance sheet of the banks. But on the other hand, some of the economists say that even though household debt has increased to 43% of GDP, it is not really a cause of concern. Why so? Reason number one. See, people take loans for three purposes: consumption, creation of assets, and productive purposes. Right now, if you see the percentage of consumption loans, right, it is quite less, 40 to 45%. More than 50 percentage of the loans are for asset creation and for productive purposes, right? So people are taking loans, but most of people are taking loans for good purpose, that is to make investment as well as creation of assets, which is good for the economy. And at the same time, when people are taking loans for creation of assets, right, it means that people have confidence in the economic growth of India. People have confidence that Indian economy would grow, their job will remain safe, their income will increase, and they will be able to repay the loans. Point number two, out of the different categories of borrowers, as you can see in this particular graph, almost two-thirds of the borrowers, that is 66% of borrowers, are prime and super prime borrowers. Only one-third of the borrowers are subprime borrowers, right? So according to some economists, they do believe that the percentage of risk which we are thinking is not so high as it is thought to be, because majority of the loans will be obviously repaid back, and hence it may not have an adverse effect on the financial position of the banks. Next, it is being said in India the household debt is somewhere around 43% of GDP. But RBI itself has highlighted that the household debt in India is quite lower as compared to the household debt in other countries. Take for instance, In US it is 73%, in UK it is 80%, and in China it is 62%. So coming to what should be our stand on this? Should we be concerned about the rising household debt? Like I said, household debt shows a K-shaped stress. As far as super prime borrowers are concerned, it is not a concern because these people have high credit worthiness. These people have taken loans for creation of assets and productive purpose, and these people would invariably repay the loans. So this is not a cause of concern. But what about subprime borrowers who have taken loans for consumption? Subprime borrowers, if they are taken loans for consumption, it means that their income level has got reduced. That is why they are taking loans for consumption, right? Apart from that, subprime borrowers, if they have taken loans and if they don't repay the loans, it might have an adverse impact on the financial position of the banks. It could lead to decrease in demand in the economy as well. So, with respect to subprime borrowers, this is a cause of concern. So that should be our stand as far as the increase in household debt is concerned. So having understood this particular topic, let's take up the practice question number 1. Which among the following best describes the concept of paradox of thrift? The answer to this particular question is increase in savings leads to decrease in GDP growth. Practice MCQ number 2. With respect to gross domestic savings in India, consider the following statements. The households account for more than 50% of gross domestic savings. Gross domestic savings, like I said, it is 30% of GDP. Households account for 18% of the savings, which means more than 50%, which is approximately 60% of savings. It is right. The household savings are not dominated by financial savings. It is dominated by physical savings. Household savings is 18%, physical savings is 13%, and financial savings is 5%. The gross domestic savings has steadily increased in the last decade. It has not increased, rather it has reduced from 34% to 30%. Right answer is 1 only. With respect to household debt in India, consider the following statements. More than 50% of the loans are in the form of consumption loans? No. More than 50% of the loans are in the form of loans taken for the creation of assets as well as for productive purposes. More than 50% of the borrowers are subprime borrowers? No. The household debt has increased in the last 5 years. It is correct. The right answer is 3 only. Now coming to this mains question. The question is, do you agree that the recent increase in household debt is a cause of concern for the Indian economy? Give arguments in support of your answer. As you can see, this is a matter of debate whether increase in public debt is a cause of concern or not. So please understand, whenever there's a question which is a kind of an debate, the best way to start the introduction of that particular answer is to open up the debate in the introduction itself. So here in the introduction, you could highlight the present status of household debt, immediately followed by you open up the debate, present both the sides of the coin in the introduction itself. For example, the household debt has increased in last 3 years to reach 43% of GDP. The RBI believes that the recent increase in household debt is not a cause of concern. However, economists have pointed out that it could adversely affect the GDP growth. So you've opened up the debate. So once you open up the debate, in the body of the answer, take one side of the debate, highlight the points under that, then move to the next point of the debate, highlights points under that. So in the body of the answer, in this particular case, you could highlight the components of gross domestic savings, the diagram which I showed you. So that diagram you could incorporate highlighting the components of gross domestic savings. And then why increase in household debt is a cause of concern and why increase in household debt is not a cause of concern. Having presented both the sides of the coin, in your conclusion, you can take a stand. And what should be a stand? The stand here should be that we should not be concerned over the prime borrowers, rather we should be concerned over the subprime borrowers. And that is what I have highlighted here. So I have highlighted that the household debt is showing a K-step stress, right? So we need not be worried about the prime borrowers, rather we need to worry about the subprime borrowers who are majorly taking loans for the purpose of consumption. That should be our stand. So this is how you could write an answer to this particular question. Let's move to the next topic. The next topic is Securities Transaction Tax, STT. Why is this tax in news? Reason number one, in this year union budget, which was presented in July 2024, the finance minister has increased the securities transaction tax on derivatives, that is futures and options. That is reason number one. Secondly, recently it was reported in the newspapers that in spite of large scale volatility in our stock market, the STT tax collections has increased by a whopping 75% as compared to the previous year. Right? Now, if you see the previous year questions related to taxes, see in India we impose so many taxes, right? So here when you are preparing for UPSC exam, there is no need for you to get into the details of each and every tax. Rather, you should focus upon those taxes which are in news. Take for example, in 2012, the capital gains tax was in news in the context of the Vodafone tax issue. Because capital gains tax was in news in 2012, accordingly, in prelims 2012, this question was asked. Same way, in prelims 2018, there was a question related to equalization levy. And this equalization levy was in news in 2017 and 18 because of this digital tax which the government had imposed. So what I'm trying to say is, if you come across some tax which is in news, try to know more details about that particular tax. For example, recently the windfall gains tax was in news. Same way now the securities transaction tax is in news. So as far as STT is concerned, you should know some important details on securities transaction tax. That is, on what is the securities transaction tax imposed, whether it is a direct tax or indirect tax, who pays the securities transaction tax. These details you are required to know. So let's start with some details about securities transaction tax. Securities transaction tax was introduced in the year 2004 through the Finance Act of 2004. So one important thing that you should know is under which law was a particular tax introduced. Why it is important is because, as you can see here, there was a statement that equalization levy has been introduced as a part of Income Tax Act, which was actually incorrect. It was introduced as part of Finance Act. Secondly, the securities transaction tax is imposed on purchase and sale of financial instruments in the stock market. So, you know, in the stock market like BSC, NSE, there is a trading of financial instruments, right? So on trading of those financial instruments, securities transaction tax is imposed. You must know that STT is not a indirect tax, it is actually a direct tax. As far as the STT rate is concerned, STT rate will vary depending upon the instrument, the financial instrument. Same way, who pays the securities transaction tax will also depend upon the underlying instrument. You'll get to know the details as I focus in the next part. So, this particular table highlights as to what is the STT rate on different financial instruments and who pays the STT rate. But I would want you to focus on the nature of transaction. Let's start with offer for sale. What is offer for sale? All of you know about IPO, initial public offer, when a company sells shares for the first time. So it is a kind of offer for sale. So when you look at this offer for sale, here the shares are still unlisted. They are not yet listed on the stock exchange. So even before they are listed on the stock exchange, when the offer for sale is made, and in the IPO, if the purchase and sale of shares is taking place from the company itself, even then STT rate is applicable. But as you can see, who is paying this STT tax? STT tax is paid by the seller. And how much is the tax rate? Tax rate is 0.2%. So if the issuer, the company in this particular case, is selling, for example, shares worth rupees 100, 0.2% of rupees 100, that is 20 paisa, will be paid as a tax. Getting it? Same goes with respect to issue of REIT or InvIT units. Secondly, when you look at the trading in the stock exchanges, trading in the stock exchanges can be intraday trading or delivery based trading. What is intraday trading? Intraday trading means you purchase and sell on the same day. For example, I might purchase a particular financial instrument in the morning at, let's say, 11 a.m. and I decide to sell the share at 3 p.m. in the afternoon. So on the same day I'm buying and selling, so that becomes intraday. If the purchase and sale is taking place on different days, then it is called as delivery based trading. So based upon whether it is intraday trading or whether it is delivery based trading, the tax rates will change accordingly. For example, for intraday trading, you can see for shares, equity mutual funds, equity exchange traded funds, which we covered in the last class, and REIT, InvIT units, the tax rate is 0.025%, and each of this is paid by the seller. On the other hand, if it is a delivery based trading, let's say for shares, the STT rate is 0.1%. And this is the only case where the STT tax is paid by both buyer as well as seller. And as you can see, every other scenario, who is paying the STT tax? The seller. But in case of delivery based trading of shares, the tax is paid both by buyer as well as seller. Right? And when it comes to derivatives, derivatives basically includes futures and options. As you can see in budget 24-25 on options, STT rate has increased from 0.0625 to 0.1%. And for futures, it has increased from 0.125 percentage to 0.02%. Now, what should you remember as far as your prelims examination is concerned? So most of you must be thinking, sir, should I remember all the tax rates which is mentioned in the table? This is just for your reference. I don't see UPSC asking a question on the tax rates. So there is no need to remember the tax rate, but remember the list of financial instruments on which STT is applicable. Take a pause. I will look at list of all these instruments. Which instruments we don't have STT? Think of it. You have shares, right? You have REITs and InvITs. You have equity mutual funds. You have equity ETF. You have futures and options. What is left then? Obviously, bonds and debentures. On bonds and debentures, there is no STT. Apart from that, exchange traded funds, as we covered in the last class, ETF, they can be equity based ETF, they could be debt based ETF, right? And you could have even gold ETF. Right now, on debt ETF and gold ETF, STT is not applicable. STT is applicable only on equity ETF. Same way, when you look at mutual funds can also be equity mutual funds and debt mutual funds. STT is applicable only on equity mutual funds and it is not applicable on debt mutual funds. So you can see, is STT applicable on all ETFs? No, it is applicable only on equity ETFs and it is not applicable on debt and gold ETF. Is STT applicable on bonds? Obviously not. So these things, if you are able to remember as far as your prelims examination is concerned, that should be more than sufficient. So let's take up the practice question here. Practice MCQ number 4. Consider the following statements related to securities transaction tax in India. STT is a form of indirect tax which has been introduced through the Finance Act of 2004. STT has been introduced through Finance Act of 2004, but it is not a indirect tax, it is a direct tax. STT is imposed on trading of financial instruments such as shares, bonds and mutual funds. It is not imposed on mutual funds, it is not imposed on bonds, and it is not imposed on all the mutual funds. It is imposed only on equity mutual funds and not on debt mutual funds. STT is always paid by the seller. Look at the table, as you can clearly see, most of the time the STT is paid by the seller of the financial instrument. But in one particular case, both buyer and seller will pay the STT, right? So that is why the third statement is also incorrect. So how many, which of the statements are incorrect? All the three statements are incorrect. On which among the following instruments is STT imposed in India? It is imposed on shares. It is not imposed on bonds and debentures. It is not imposed on debt mutual fund units. And it is not imposed on gold ETFs. And the right answer is one only, right? So having understood about the securities transaction tax, let's now move to the next article. The next article is related to unified payment interface. Before discussing what is this article all about, let me just give you a brief background about this particular article. The Unified Payment Interface was developed by National Payment Corporation of India in the year 2016. Unified Payment Interface is an open application programming interface which can be integrated by third-party apps. The reason why we are called it as open application programming interface is when third-party apps like PhonePe, GPay, WhatsApp, etc., when they incorporate UPI into their mobile apps, to use that UPI or to integrate UPI, they are not required to pay any fee, any commission to NPCI, which has developed this UPI system. So in a way, UPI is a digital public good which has been developed by government through NPCI in order to foster digital payments. So UPI right now has been incorporated by more than 40 third-party apps such as Google Pay, Phone Pay, Paytm, Bharat Pay, Cred, Amazon, WhatsApp, and so when UPI was launched in the year 2016, right? So in 2017, the total value of transactions carried out through UPI was just 1 lakh crores. But last year, that is in 23-24, the total value of UPI transactions had increased to a whopping 200 lakh crores, which clearly shows a phenomenal success of UPI in promoting the digital ecosystem in India. But there are some concerns with respect to UPI ecosystem. Like I said, right now we have more than 40 third-party apps which have integrated UPI. But the problem here is out of these more than 40 apps, there are just two apps which have a huge market share in UPI ecosystem. And these two apps include PhonePe and GPay. PhonePe commands approximately 50% of UPI transactions. GPay commands 35% of the UPI transactions. So that way, Google Pay and Phone Pay together account for 85% of the share of UPI transactions. So clearly, there is a concentration risk. What kind of concentration risk? Imagine just two mobile apps are processing more than 85% of transactions. And if by chance, if something happens to these two apps, then whatever success that we have had with respect to UPI payments, that success will go waste. So ideally, there has to be a diversified third party apps through which UPI transactions should take place, and we should not be just dependent upon 2 to 3 mobile apps, right? So in order to promote that diversified third party apps, especially to promote smaller apps and to reduce the concentration risk, in the year 2020, NPCI imposed a cap of 30% on UPI market share. What is this cap of 30% of UPI market share? So what NPS has said is we will see what is the total value of UPI transactions in the previous quarter of the financial year. Previous quarter of the financial year means the last 3 months. So let's say in last 3 months, the total value of UPI transactions throughout India was equal to rupees 100. In next 3 months, next quarter, one particular mobile app cannot process more than 30% of UPI transactions. So the previous month it was rupees 100. So the next 3 months, up one particular mobile app cannot process more than 30% of rupees 100. It means it cannot process more than rupees 30 of UPI transactions. So this cap is based upon the value of UPI transactions in the previous 3 months. So the basic idea here is that market share of PhonePe should not be more than 30%. The market share of GPay should not be more than 30%. If their share reduces, automatically what will happen is the share of smaller apps would increase, right? So for the bigger players like PhonePe and GPay, NPCI said, look, Once you have processed up to 30 percentage of market share, you should stop processing the UPI payments completely. So naturally, then people will shift through other smaller apps, right? So that was the basic idea behind imposing this market share by National Payment Corporation of India. This particular cap of 30% on the UPI market share was supposed to be met by Jan 1st, 2021. But as it generally happens in India, deadlines are kept basically in order to be postponed, right? So same thing happened. We set a deadline by Jan 1st, 2021, but it got postponed to December 31st, 2024. But as you can see, December 31st, 2024, this market cap of 30% has now been further extended to another 2 more years, that is December 2026. One can only hope that in 2026 it should not get extended once again, right? Now, with respect to this thing, the deadline has got extended to December 31st, 2026. That is one development. The second development is with respect to WhatsApp payment. All of you do use WhatsApp, right? In WhatsApp, they have introduced a new feature of WhatsApp Pay. So WhatsApp has got a license to facilitate UPI payments by the Reserve Bank of India. But until now, that is until December 31st, 2024, there was restriction on WhatsApp as to how many users it can onboard. That is to how many users it can offer the WhatsApp Pay feature. Now that restriction has been done away with. So now WhatsApp can onboard as many customers as possible because that restriction has been done away with, which means slowly over a period of time, the market share of WhatsApp payment could very well increase. Further, as you can see in December, on Jan 2025, we had this article about UPI is too big to succeed, right? So with respect to the recent development, a number of industry experts or the third party apps, the smaller apps, what they have been demanding here is that they have been demanding for merchant discount rate on UPI transaction. They do think that in order to reduce the concentration risk, in order to promote smaller apps, rather than putting this kind of limit on market share, it is much better if we impose MDR on UPI payments. By doing so, we will be able to promote smaller apps. Now, why is this important? Is because as you can see in prelims 2018, we had a question related to merchant discount rate. So as far as the recent development is concerned, two things are important. One is cap on UPI market share, which I have already covered as part of the background. And what is now important is concept of MDR and interchange fee on UPI transactions. So let's understand what is MDR and what is this interchange fee. And more importantly, how imposition of MDR on UPI payments could help us reduce the concentration risk and promote the smaller apps. To understand MDR, let's say there is a person, a customer, who has an account with ICICI Bank. This particular person makes a payment to merchant using debit card, credit card, or UPI. And let's say the merchant is accepting the payment through, let's say, the POS machine, that is the point of sale machine, or he could be accepting the payment through QR code. So this particular merchant has an account with HDFC. So you must understand, to enable this merchant to accept payment, there are a number of players who are involved. For example, the customer bank, ICICI Bank is involved. The merchant bank, HDFC is involved. And then you have, the the debit card and credit card issuers like MasterCard, Visa who are involved. Plus, you know, NPCI is also involved if payment is made through UPI. Apart from that, you have entities who are providing for the POS machines like Paytm, right? So these people who are facilitating this particular merchant to accept payment, shouldn't they be rewarded for providing these services to merchant? Obviously. So for that, the merchant who is accepting the payment, the merchant is required to pay a fee to his bank. Which is his bank? HDFC. To his bank, the merchant will pay a fee which is called as merchant discount rate. So merchant accepting the payment pays merchant discount rate to his bank, that is HDFC. Who fixes the merchant discount rate? RBI. How is MDR fixed? MDR is fixed as percentage of the value of the transaction. And how much is a percentage? This percentage, how much the merchant has to pay, this percentage will depend upon two factors. One factor is the category of merchant, whether it is a small merchant or a big merchant, and the mode through which he is accepting payment, whether he is accepting payment through physical POS, that is point of sale machine, or whether he is accepting payment through QR code. So the percentage which is to be paid by the merchant is fixed by RBI. How much percentage is to be paid? That depends upon the category of merchant and the mode of acceptance of payment. And that percentage ranges between 0.40% to 0.95% depending upon the category of merchant and the mode of acceptance. Just as an example, let's say I'm a merchant and I accept rupees 100 from a customer. And let's say the merchant discount rate is fixed at 0.40%. So out of this 100 rupees which I'm accepting, 0.40 rupees I would have to pay to my bank, which is in this case HDFC. So how much money I will be left with? I will be left with 99.60. This is the money which I will actually be left with. Now what will happen is once this HDFC bank gets money, like I said, it is not just HDFC bank which is enabling the merchant to accept payment. You have customer bank, you have card issuers like MasterCard, Visa, right? What actually happens is the HDFC bank will pay some amount of money to payment system operator. For example, in case of cards, debit card or credit card, that could be MasterCard, Visa or RuPay. In case of UPI, the payment system operator could be NPCI as well as third party apps like Phone Pay, GPay, etc. Right? So even they will get a share of that particular merchant discount rate. Some amount of money HDFC bank will pay to the customer's bank, that is the customer's bank in this particular case is ICICI. And this proportion of MDR, this part of MDR which the merchant bank pays to the customer's bank, that is called as interchange fee. So it's like saying merchant will pay MDR to the merchant bank, in this case HDFC. Some part of MDR HDFC will pay to ICICI bank, which is actually customer's bank. So this payment we call it as interchange. So interchange fee is actually part of the MDR only, which the merchant bank will share with the customer's bank. Some amount of money HDFC bank will keep with itself. as far as MDR is concerned, how much MDR is to be paid? Who is fixing it? Reserve Bank of India. But how much should be the interchange fee? Who is fixing this interchange? In case of cards, the interchange fee is actually fixed by MasterCard, Visa, as well as RuPay. They are fixing the interchange fee as to how much fee should be given to the concerned bank. So, in a way, interchange fee is a tool by which the payment system operators are able to attract the banks and probably incentivize them to issue their cards. How so? For example, let's say MasterCard offers to ICICI Bank and says, you issue my card, that is MasterCard. And on this MasterCard, if payment is made, I will pay you a interchange fee of, for example, 0.2%. On the other hand, Visa might say to ICICI Bank, you issue my card, that is Visa Bank, that is Visa card. And on that, if you are accepting payment, I am ready to pay you interchange fee of 0.25. So think, if ICICI Bank issues MasterCard, interchange fee that it gets is 0.20. If it issues Visa card, you'll get 0.25%. So ICICI Bank would obviously issue Visa card, right? So whatever details I have covered, it is there here. You can just see. So one important thing you should know, MDR fixed by RBI, interchange fee fixed by payment system operator, right? Now let's see the next part, that is scheme to boost UPI and RuPay. Government announced zero MDR, zero merchant discount rate on RuPay debit card and UPI payments in 2020. What does this mean? This basically means that if merchant is accepting payment through RuPay debit card or credit card, or if merchant is accepting payment through UPI, merchant need not pay merchant discount rate at all. It is free of cost. On the other hand, if merchant is accepting payment through MasterCard, through Visa, other card operators, in that case, merchant will be required to pay merchant discount rate. So think, if I'm a merchant, what will I be inclined to accept? I will be more inclined to accept payment through RuPay card or UPI because I don't have to pay MDR. But if I accept payment through MasterCard or Visa, I will be required to pay MDR. Why was such a rule introduced? The basic idea of having this rule was to promote indigenous payment system, which is RuPay as well as UPI, to encourage the merchants to accept more payments through RuPay and UPI. But it is being said that this particular feature actually went against the interest of the RuPay card itself. Why so? Let's understand. Think here, if bank issues RuPay card, there's a bank which issues RuPay card. On RuPay card, there's no MDR. And if there's no MDR on RuPay card, it means the bank will not get any interchange fee at all. On the other hand, if bank issues MasterCard or Visa, on MasterCard or Visa, the merchant will pay MDR. If merchant is paying MDR on MasterCard or Visa, obviously the bank which is issuing MasterCard or Visa card will get the interchange fee. So banks were more interested to issue MasterCard or Visa because on that they will get interchange fee. But if they issue RuPay card, they'll not get interchange fee. So banks slowly and steadily, instead of issuing RuPay card, they started issuing more MasterCard and Visa. The objective of the government was to promote RuPay card, but this was going against the government's objective, right? So to solve this particular problem. In the year 2021, the government announced a scheme to compensate for the loss of zero MDR. So think of MDR on UPI and RuPay. The merchant bank, the customer bank, the payment system operators like third party apps, the card operators, they are not earning anything, right? So to compensate for this loss, the government decided to give them incentive. But the problem here is the incentive which is provided by the government is not equal to the loss suffered by these players. For example, if the loss suffered by the merchant bank, customer bank, third party apps, the card networks because of zero MDR on UPI, if that loss is equal to, let's say, 1000 crores, government is not paying them 1000 crores. Government might pay them just, let's say, 250 crores, which means they're not adequately compensated for their loss. Because we are focusing on the third party apps like PhonePe, GPay, Paytm, Cred, and so on, let's understand how it is impacting their business. So think you have PhonePe, GPay, they are already big players, right? They are already big players. They have large number of customers. So they are not earning anything because of zero MDR on UPI. Whenever they are facilitating UPI payments, they're not earning anything. So you must be thinking, if they're not earning anything on facilitating UPI payments, how are they even making profits? If you look at these apps, right, what they are doing, because they have large number of customers who are using these apps, they are earning huge amount of profits by selling other financial products. For example, they might sell financial products on their app like insurance, like mutual funds. They might enable banks to accept deposits. They might enable banks to give loans to the customers. So other banks, what are they doing? They are entering into tie-up with these third-party apps. Through these apps, they are giving loans to the customers and they are also accepting deposits to the customers as well. And for doing all of this, they are earning huge amount of commission. So think of PhonePe and GPay. They have deep pockets. Because they have deep pockets, they have made huge investment in attracting customers. Even though they are not earning anything on UPI payments, but because of the large customer base, they are earning huge amount of commission on all these financial products. But what about smaller apps? Smaller apps do not have deep pockets like these big companies. So because they do not have deep pockets, they are unable to attract customers. And because they are unable to attract customers on their particular app, they are not being able to earn profit also. So how do you encourage the smaller apps to earn profit? How do you ensure that the smaller apps are able to make more investment and attract more customers? Only way to do that is if UPI payments are made through smaller apps, then the smaller apps should be able to earn profits in the form of MDR. And that is the demand of the smaller apps in India. But this is just one side of the story. There's another side of the story as well. One of the reason for the phenomenal success of UPI is it is free. free of cost. I as a customer need not have to pay anything for UPI payments. Merchant does not have to pay anything for the UPI payment. That is why customers and merchants both have accepted UPI on a large scale. Imagine if merchants are required to pay MDR on accepting payment through UPI. Merchants might pass on the burden to customers, or merchants might be discouraged to accept payment through UPI, and instead the merchants could insist the customers to pay in terms of cash. So it is going back to the pre 2016 year, that is pre UPI days, when people used to use more of cash and not digital payments. So this particular policy has a trade-off, where if you impose MDR on UPI, probably it can promote the smaller apps. But if you impose MDR on UPI, it could discourage the digital payments. So it's a matter of debate. But as far as your prelims examination is concerned, if you know this much, that should be more than sufficient. So let's take up the practice question. Consider the following with respect to unified payment interface. The UPI can be linked to bank accounts, wallets, and credit cards. Yes, it is correct. You can link the UPI even to your online wallets like Amazon Pay balance. You can link your UPI to even credit card. A customer cannot make payment of more than rupees 1 lakh in a day through UPI under any circumstance. Generally, the per day transaction limit on UPI is 1 lakh generally. But in certain exceptional cases, you can make payment of rupees more than 1 lakh. In what cases? For example, if you're purchasing shares in an IPO, if you're making payment of fees to an educational institution or to a hospital, in that case, you can make a UPI transaction of more than rupees 1 lakh. Because the statement says under any circumstances, the statement is incorrect. Presently, there's a cap on percentage of UPI transactions which can be processed by third-party apps. Presently, we don't have such cap. Probably that particular cap, hopefully, will come into being after December 31st, 2026. So the right answer is 1 only. Which among the following best describes the interchange fee? As I covered, interchange fee is a fee which is part of merchant discount rate and shared with the payment instrument provider, such as the wallet provider, or it could be the customer bank also. So the answer in this particular case is D. Let's move to the next article. The next article is about business correspondent model. As you can see, recently in Business Standard, it was reported that for the first time in 12 years, the banks are reworking on their business correspondent model. Why is it important? Because in prelims 2014, a direct question on business correspondent has already been asked. And as you can see, generally questions which are related to financial inclusion are also asked in UPSC prelims. So based upon the nature of questions asked in previous year prelims, you should know the salient features of business correspondent model. Based upon that, we will take up this prelims question for practice at the end of our discussion. So let's understand what is business correspondent model. Basically, RBI has come up with branch licensing norms. As per the branch licensing norms, banks are not required to take prior approval of the RBI to open new branches. But banks have to ensure that at least 25% of the bank branches are opened in rural and unbanked areas. So think of rural areas. Rural areas even today account for 68% of India's population. But what percentage of bank branches are located there? Just 25%, which means that there is lack of adequate banking facilities in the rural areas. But at the same time, imagine if you force the banks to open more branches in rural areas, it may be unviable for the banks to open more branches in rural areas. They might be not very profitable. So we need to find a middle ground, right? A middle ground where people in rural areas should be able to get banking facilities, and at the same time ensure that banks are able to have presence in rural areas without the need to set up large physical branches. That middle ground is what is in the form of business correspondent. So who is that business correspondent or banking correspondent? Business correspondent is basically an agent or representative of the bank. So instead of having physical bank branches in rural areas, banks can appoint someone to act as their representative. So the bank representative can enable the people to open bank accounts. They can help the people to do basic banking services like accepting deposit, withdrawal, or remittances. So generally, the banking correspondent will be carrying a handheld ATM machine, or it is also called as micro ATM machine, which can be authenticated through fingerprint. So through this handheld machine, the customers can deposit, withdraw, or provide for money transfer. They can assist with small value loans. They can promote awareness of financial products, or they can even sell the insurance and mutual fund products to the people. Who can be a business correspondent? This has been highlighted by RBI. So RBI has come up with a detailed guideline. According to RBI's guideline, business correspondent could be a NGO, microfinance institution, cooperative society, NBFC, post offices, retired bank employees or teachers, ex-servicemen, kirana or fair price shops, or individuals who are operating common service center. Let's say that an individual who is operating Aadhaar enrollment center. Even that individual can also act as a banking correspondent. How do they earn money? Whenever they facilitate the banking transactions, on that they are paid certain amount of commission or fee by the concerned bank. Please understand, banking correspondents cannot demand the service charge from the customers. They cannot do that. They can get the money only from the bank whom they are serving, and they cannot demand money from the customers. How are we ensuring accountability of banking correspondent? To ensure accountability, RBI has said all the banking correspondents should function through ultra small branches. Ultra small branches means, let's say we have around 15 to 20 banking correspondents in a specified area. For all of these 15 to 20 banking correspondent, there should be one physical place through which they are able to facilitate all these banking services. That physical space will be called as ultra small branches, extremely small branches. And every ultra small branch will be under a base branch. For example, let's say there is a bank branch at a block level, taluka level, and there are, let's say, 2 to 3 villages in a particular area. In those 2 to 3 villages, let's say there are 15 to 20 business correspondent. The bank branch at the taluka level will have an oversight over the ultra small branch. And according to RBI's guideline, this is very interesting. One business correspondent can actually act as business correspondent of multiple banks. So one person can be acting as a banking correspondent for SBI also, for ICICI also, as well as HDFC also. But how do you prevent conflict of interest? For that, what RBI has said, see, every bank will have one ultra small branch. Like SBI will have one ultra small branch, ICICI will have one ultra small branch, HDFC will have one ultra small branch. Business correspondent can be a business correspondent of multiple banks. But when he is serving in one ultra small branch, he should be serving the interests of that particular bank only. So if business correspondent is sitting in a ultra small branch of SBI, he should be serving the interest of SBI only. He cannot serve the interest of ICICI or HDFC. So this is a little tricky. Might be asked in UPSC prelims. That is why I have incorporated this in the slide. So please remember. Based upon our discussion, let's take up the practice question related to business correspondent model. With respect to business correspondent model, consider the following statements. The banks are allowed to appoint NBFCs as business correspondent in rural areas. Yes, as you can very well see, NBFCs are allowed. A person cannot work as business correspondent of multiple banks. Incorrect. Business correspondents are free to charge free from the customers. Incorrect. The right answer in this particular case is one only. The next article is related to global minimum corporate tax. This particular article is in news because of the recent withdrawal of US from the global tax deal. After taking over as president of US for the second time, President Trump has decided to withdraw US from the global minimum corporate tax deal, which was earlier signed by multiple countries, including India. Now, why is this topic important? As you can see, in prelims 2016, we had a related question about base erosion and profit shifting. So, you need to be aware about what exactly is the global minimum corporate tax, what are the salient features and its working mechanism. Based upon that, we shall be taking up this particular practice question at the end of our discussion. So let's first understand what do you mean by base erosion and profit shifting. Now let's say there is a particular country, there's a particular company which is registered in a tax haven. And this particular country, after being registered in a tax haven, it starts its branches in other countries. Let's say it is setting up its branches in US or India. This company might be earning huge amount of profits in US or India. But this particular company is registered in a tax haven country. And you know that in a tax haven country, the corporate tax rates are extremely low. So this particular company, even though it is earning profit in other countries such as US or India, this company, because it is registered in a tax haven country, it will be required to pay tax in a tax haven country. And in tax haven country, the corporate tax are very low. So that way, this company will be able to avoid payment of taxes. So what is happening here is this company is shifting its profit from a country where the tax rate is high to a country where the tax rate is lower. By shifting its profit, the company tax base reduces and hence the company ends up paying less tax. This strategy, which is followed by multinational companies, we call it as base erosion and profit shifting. So the right answer to this particular question is B. So in order to reduce this tax avoidance by multinational companies, one of an international organization called as Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, has come up with a concept of global minimum corporate tax. As per the proposal of OECD, all the countries across the world should have minimum corporate tax of 15%. So if companies want, they can have a corporate tax of more than 15% also. But countries who are signing this particular treaty, the countries should not reduce the corporate tax rates to below 15%. Minimum corporate tax rate should be equal to 15%. For example, in case of India, the corporate tax rate is somewhere around 22 to 25%, right? Which is above the minimum corporate tax of 15%. But can it go below 15%? Absolutely not, if India has signed this particular treaty. So, global minimum corporate tax is covered under Pillar 2 of OECD BEPS framework, which is also referred to as Global Anti-Base Erosion Proposal or the GLOBE proposal. It is applicable to all the multinational companies provided their global revenue is above a certain threshold level, that is more than 750 million euros. So it is obviously not applicable to MNCs whose global revenue is below 750 million euros. The tax rate, like I said, should be 15% and above. Right now, this particular tax deal is signed by more than 130 countries, including India as well as US. So earlier Biden administration had agreed to this particular tax deal, but now Trump has decided to withdraw US from the tax. So how does this global minimum corporate tax actually works? Let's understand its working mechanism. For that, what we do is, number one, we will check if a particular company is located in a country which has signed this particular treaty and has adopted minimum tax rate of 15%. If the country has adopted minimum tax rate of 15%, the company will pay that particular tax in the concerned country only. Think for example, Ireland. Ireland has accepted this particular deal. Before accepting the deal, the corporate tax rate in Ireland was somewhere around 12%. From 12% now it is increased to 15%. So if a company is now based in Ireland and Ireland has a tax rate of 15%, the company will pay tax in Ireland as per the qualified domestic minimum tax rule. But what if the company is located in a country which has not signed this tax treaty and there the corporate tax is below 15%, right? If this condition is not satisfied, then we will see where is the ultimate parent company located. For example, there must be a company A. This company A could be owned by another company B. And this company B is owned by another company C. So this company A is located in a country where the tax rate is below 15%. So this company A's ultimate parent company is company C, right? So we will see where is this ultimate parent company located. Is the ultimate parent company located in a country which has adopted minimum tax rate of 15%? If it is yes, in that particular case, the company will pay what is called as top up tax in the country where the ultimate parent company is located or based. So what do you mean by top up tax? For example, let's say in this particular country, which has not adopted minimum corporate tax of 15%. Let's say the tax rate here is equal to just 10%. What is the minimum tax which the company has to pay? Minimum tax which the company has to pay is 15%. But this company is located in a country where the tax rate is below 15%. It is paying only 10%. So the remaining 5% tax has to be paid in the country where its ultimate parent company is located. But let's think the place where the ultimate parent company is located, even that particular country has not adopted the global minimum corporate tax rate of 15%. In that case, what will happen? In that case, we will see where is this intermediate parent company located. Is the intermediate parent company located in a country which has adopted minimum tax rate of 15%? If it is yes, in that particular case, in that country where the intermediate parent company is located, there the company will pay the top up tax. But there could be a situation where the company here might be located, its parent company might be located in a tax haven country, which has not adopted tax minimum tax rate of 15%. Its intermediate parent company might also be located in a tax haven where it has not adopted the global minimum tax rate of 15%. In that case, what will happen? In that particular case, we will look at what is called as untaxed profit tax rule. As per this untaxed profit tax rule, what we'll do, we will add the total profits of the company, which is earning in this country, and this country. What is its total profit? On that total profit, we will apply a tax rate of 15%. We'll say 15% tax will be applicable. And what will happen is, whatever tax we collect, it will be distributed among all the tax jurisdictions where the company has a presence. And on what basis will all the countries will get a share of this profit? All the countries will get a share of profits based upon the percentage of profits earned in different countries. Take for example, we have a company located in a country where there is no minimum corporate tax of 15%. Its intermediate parent company and ultimate parent company are also located in countries where the global minimum corporate tax rate of 15% is not adopted. We will add up the profits of the companies. We'll calculate the 15% tax on that. And this particular tax amount will be distributed among all the countries where the company is earning profit. Let's say this company might be earning profit in India, and in India it is earning 10% of its global profit. So India will get 10% of this share of tax. That is how this particular global minimum corporate tax is going to work once it is implemented. Why have we adopted the global minimum corporate tax? Because of tax avoidance by multinational companies. The countries across the world are losing out on tax revenue. It is being said that the global tax revenue that we are losing out is somewhere around $150 billion. So obviously, by having this global minimum corporate tax, we will be able to check the tax avoidance by multinational companies. We will stop the multinational companies from setting up their establishments in tax havens, and we'll be able to earn a tax revenue as well. So it is an important part of global tax reforms. And lastly, it is being said that it will prevent a race to the bottom. What is this race to the bottom? Countries across the world are reducing their corporate tax rates in order to attract more foreign investment. There has been mad race among the countries in terms of competition to reduce the tax rate. If one country has tax rate of 10%, another country will have a tax rate of 8%. So to attract more investment, another country will reduce the corporate tax rate to 5%. So how do you check this mad race among the countries to cut this corporate tax? By having global minimum corporate tax. Now some of you must be wondering, why did Trump decided to withdraw from the global tax deal, which was earlier signed by Biden administration? Obviously, there are multiple reasons for that. As you can see, President Trump has been reversing a number of policies which were earlier implemented by the Biden administration. So this is a kind of a reversal of the policies of the Biden administration. Reason number two, Trump, as we all know, believes in the philosophy of America First policy. Trump, as such, has been opposed to multilateralism. For example, he has been opposed to the dispute settlement mechanism in World Trade Organization as well. So, Trump has been opposed to multilateralism, and as you can see, this global tax deal is a multilateral effort of the countries to combat the menace of tax avoidance. So Trump, because he believes in America First policy, he has been opposed to global tax deal. He believes that the global tax deal is against his policy of America First policy because as per this global tax deal, it affects the tax sovereignty of US, which means US in future, if it wants to reduce the tax rate, which is now somewhere around 21%, if US wants to reduce it to below 15%, US will not be able to do it because US has signed this particular treaty. So he believes that this multilateral effort to curb tax avoidance is against the tax sovereignty of US. Nextly, Trump also believes that it is unfairly targeting US based companies such as Google, Apple, and so on. That is why Trump decided to withdraw from this particular global tax deal. So you must be wondering, what are its implications? How is it going to affect the tax deal? You must understand this is an ongoing issue. We'll understand its implications as we'll see in future how it is going to affect Indian interest, how it is going to affect the global tax deal, all of that in future. As of now, from the prelims perspective, if you know this much, that is more than sufficient. So let's take up this practice question number 9. With respect to global minimum corporate tax, consider the following statements. It has been introduced by the World Bank. No, it has been introduced by OECD. It is applicable to all the MNCs. No, it is applicable to only those MNCs whose global revenue is 750 million euros or more. Countries signing this treaty must impose minimum corporate tax of 15%, which is correct. So let's move to the next section. In this particular section, I will be covering some important terms in news in the last week. The term which I have picked up for this particular week here is a very difficult concept of capital output ratio and incremental capital output ratio. Some of you might have read this particular article written by Dr. Rangarajan on Jan 18, 2025 in the Hindu newspaper. In this particular article, Rangarajan discusses about the growth prospects of the Indian economy. And if you have carefully read this particular article, in this article, he also makes a mention of capital output ratio as well. And why is this topic of capital output ratio important? As you can see, this was a question that was asked in prelims 2018. A question on capital formation has been asked in 2013, and almost a related question in 2015. 15. Plus, difference between capital output ratio and incremental capital output ratio is a difficult concept to understand for most of the students. So we will understand these two terms, and based upon our understanding, we will solve this particular practice. So let's understand capital output ratio and incremental capital output ratio. See, both capital output ratio and incremental capital output ratio measure the efficiency with which capital is used. But there is a minute difference between the two. For that, let me take an example. Let's consider textile industry. In textile industry, let's say there is company A and company B. Both are into manufacturing of textile. Company A makes an investment of total 150 rupees, comprising of 100 rupees investment in land, 25 rupees investment in handloom, 25 rupees investment in wages. Company B makes an investment of 200 rupees, comprising 100 rupees investment in land, 60 rupees investment in wages, and look, it has made investment in power loom. Can you observe the difference? Company A has bought a hand loom. Company B, on the other hand, has bought a power loom. So power loom, as you know, is more efficient. It can produce more textiles as compared to hand loom, right? So let's say company A produces 30 shirts in the year 2023, while company B produces 50 shirts in the year 2023. Let's now look at the concept of capital output ratio. Look at the word capital output ratio. Numerator, capital invested. Denominator, what is the total output? So capital output ratio is calculated as total capital invested divided by the total output. See company A, how much capital has it invested? It has invested 150. What is its output? 30 shirts. 150 divided by 30. How much will be the capital output ratio? It will be equal to 5. Same way, capital output ratio of B. How much capital it has invested? 200. How much is its output? 50. 200 divided by 50. What is the capital output ratio? 4. So you must be thinking, this is a formula, but what is the significance of this? Think like this. CSAT. It's like saying to produce 30 shirts, company needs a total capital of 150. To produce one shirt, how much capital the company needs? So 1 by 30 into 50, which is 150 divided by 30. What is 150? Capital. What is 30? Output. So capital divided by output. What does it say? It says how much capital is needed to produce 1 unit of output. You know? So in this particular case, capital output ratio is 5. It means this company needs 5 rupees to produce one shirt. In this case, capital output ratio is 4. It means this company needs 4 rupees to produce one shirt. Who has made more investment in capital? Company B has made investment of 200. Company A has made an investment of 150. But which company requires less capital to produce one shirt? It is actually company B. Why so? What the reason? The reason is company B is not using hand loom. The company B is using power loom, right? So you can see capital output ratio is total stock of capital. How much is the total capital invested divided by total output, which tells us how much capital is needed to produce one unit of a output. It measures the efficiency of the total capital which is invested. So you must understand, higher the core value, it means lower the efficiency of the total capital. You know? If lower the core value, higher the efficiency of the total capital, because it requires less capital to produce one unit of product. So company B requires less capital than company A to produce one shirt because it is using power. I hope this concept is clear. Capital output ratio. Let's move to incremental capital output ratio. Now let's say in the year 2024, company A purchases IoT enabled automatic power loom. Look at this word IoT, Internet of Things, right? So this automatic power loom is IoT enabled, and in a way it is far more efficient than this particular power loom. Efficiency in terms of what? Let's say while it is spinning a particular shirt, if there is breakages in the thread, it does not require manual intervention. On its own, let's say it is able to fix that particular breakages in thread, and then it is able to produce the shirt much more faster as compared to power loom, right? What has company A done? Company A has learned its problem. It has learned its mistake, that we should not invest in handloom, we must invest in advanced technology. Let's say it has invested in IoT enabled power loom, which it has bought at rupees 50. On the other hand, company B purchases another power loom, normal power loom, which it was using before. Before it purchased at 40, now also it has purchased it at 40. Same power loom. Now, company A produces 50 shirts in 2024. Last year, 30 shirts. This year, 50 shirts. Now, this company produces 60 shirts in 2024. Let's quickly understand the capital output ratio. Let's calculate the capital output ratio for both these companies. How is it calculated? Just recall, total stock of capital invested divided by total output. For company A, what is this total stock of capital? See, last year in 2023, how much capital it had invested? 150. Now in 2024, how much capital it has invested? 50. So what is the stock of capital? 150 plus 50. Stock of capital is 200. From this stock of capital of 200, how much is the output? The output which it is getting is 50, right? So total capital is 200 divided by total output, that is 50, which means 4. Now see, 200 divided by 50 is 4. Its core value is 4. It means now this company A requires rupees 4 to produce one shirt. In 2023, how much money was it needing? It was needing 5 rupees to produce one shirt. Same way, now for company B, capital output ratio, total capital invested last year was 200, this year it is 240. 200 plus 40 is 240, divided by total output is 60, right? So divided by 60 is 4. Now it requires 4 rupees to produce one shirt. Has a core value changed for company B? Obviously not, right? But what has happened to core value of company A? Core value of company A has got reduced. What has happened? The efficiency with which the total capital is utilized, that efficiency has increased. That is a core value. But what is I core then? See, I core is a flow concept. It is not a stock concept. As a flow concept, incremental capital output ratio is calculated as incremental capital divided by incremental output. Getting confused? Look at the numerator, incremental capital. Incremental capital means in that particular year, how much is the new capital that you have invested? How much new capital has the company A invested? Company A has invested a new capital of rupees 50, right? What is incremental output? By what extent has the production increased? Last year, 30 shirts. This year, 50 shirts. By what extent the output has increased? Output has increased by 20 shirts. How much is the additional capital? Additional capital is 50. So ICOR is calculated as incremental capital invested divided by incremental output. 50 divided by 20, that is 2.5. So what is this 2.5? 2.5 means henceforth, now if you want to increase its output by one additional shirt, now the company needs an investment of just 2.5. On the other hand, if you see this side, what is incremental capital? Incremental capital is 60. What is incremental output? Last year, 50. Incremental capital in this particular case is 40. And incremental output in this particular case is 20. So you can see, sorry, it's 10. 60 minus 50 is 10. So it will be equal to 40 divided by 10, that is 4. So it requires rupees 4 to produce one additional shirt. So we should always see incremental capital divided by incremental output. So that way, can you see the difference here? Incremental capital output ratio is capital invested in a particular year divided by change in output in a year. Whereas here we are looking at the total stock of capital. Here we are looking at total capital invested in one single year. Denominator, what is the total output? Here the denominator is what is the change in the output. ICOR will tell us how much is the additional capital required to produce one additional unit of output. COR measures efficiency of total capital. ICOR measures efficiency of the new capital. Higher the ICOR value, lower the efficiency of new capital. That is quite understandable, right? So as you can see, company A requires less additional capital than company B to produce one shirt because it is using advanced IoT enabled power. That is how you need to find the difference. Based upon that, let's take up this particular practice question. A consistent increase in ICOR. I told you ICOR is capital invested in a year divided by incremental output. So it says if the ICOR value increases, what does it mean if ICOR value increases? It means numerator value has increased whereas denominator value has got reduced, right? So there is increase in investment for sure. But what has happened to efficiency of the new capital? I told you if ICOR value increases, it means the efficiency of the new capital has got reduced. If the output has got reduced, obviously it means that there is decrease in the GDP growth rate. So answer in this case is 1D. Now coming to the next term in news. The next term in news is with respect to state advice prices. As we can see, in Business Standard, it was reported that the sugar mills in the state of UP want a status quo on state advice prices due to rising cost of production. So what do you mean by state advised prices? All of you know about MSP, minimum support price. Similar to MSP which is announced for food grains, the government of India announces FRP for sugarcane. This FRP for sugarcane is announced by the Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs based upon the recommendations of Commission on Cost and prices. Commission on Agriculture Cost and Prices. So based upon the recommendations of CSCP, Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs will announce FRP. What you must know is there is no legal backing for MSP. There is no law under which MSP is declared. But FRP is declared under Sugarcane Control Order of 1966. And this Sugarcane Control Order of 1966 is in turn issued under the Essential Commodities Act of 1955, which means for FRP, there is a legal backing. What is the meaning of legal backing? It basically means that once the government announces FRP for sugarcane, the sugarcane farmers grow and they go and sell sugarcane to sugar mills. The sugar mills must compulsorily pay a price which is equal to FRP announced by the center. If they fail to do so, then it becomes illegal. Think of it. Can a trader purchase rice at below MSP? Obviously, yes, because there's no legal backing for MSP. But can a sugarcane industry purchase sugarcane below FRP? No, because the FRP is declared under the Essential Commodities Act. Central government announces FRP. Apart from that, there are few states. Predominantly, these states include UP, Haryana, Uttarakhand, and Punjab. These states also announce what is called as state advice prices. And as you can see, these states include Punjab, Haryana, Uttarakhand, Uttar Pradesh. They announce the state advice prices, and usually the state advice prices announced by the state governments, it is higher than FRP, which is announced by the central government. So what actually happens in these two states, that is UP and Uttarakhand, is that the burden of paying this state advice prices falls directly on the sugar mills. So if central government is announcing an FRP of rupees 100, and in UP and Uttarakhand state advice prices is 120, then sugar mills would have to pay 120 in these two states. Whereas in Punjab and Haryana, the mechanism is little different, but you don't have to worry about. What you need to know is state advice prices is declared by some of the state governments in India. How many states? 4 states. Second, state advice prices is normally higher than the FRP, because of which it imposes additional burden on the sugarcane industries. So, having understood this, let's look at the practice question. The state advice price is the price paid by state government on purchase of sugarcane from the farmers. Is it paid by the state government or is it paid by the sugar mills? It is paid by the sugar mills. SAP is announced in only few states? Yes, only 4 states. SAP is generally higher than FRP declared by the center? Yes, answer is 2 and 3. Now coming to the last section, that is schemes in news. In last week's section, I had highlighted that usually in prelims, questions are asked with respect to schemes. Like in prelims 2024, we had 3 to 4 questions related to schemes. And if you closely observe the questions on schemes, you'll find that whatever questions UPSC had asked on, usually these schemes were in news last year. Take for instance, Pradhan Mantri Surashit Matritva Abhiyan, Pradhan Mantri Shram Yogi Mandan, as well as corporate social responsibility. So let's see for this particular week, for the last week, what schemes were in news. One is Pradhan Mantri Vishwakarma scheme. All of the details I have highlighted along with the practice question. The next scheme is related to Swamitwa scheme. I have highlighted all the prelims pointers along with the practice. Please go through these two schemes, the prelims pointers which I have highlighted. Based upon that, please solve the practice questions and please comment your answer in the comment section below. So I'll meet you next week. Until then, keep studying. Thank you so much.